because it's the first time I took mushrooms. And not to glorify it, but for me, I have to learn to laugh at myself. And in spirituality too, I think we need to learn to laugh at ourselves. So I share stupid shit like this because it's stupid shit. And I like to laugh at myself. So it was my birthday, and this was my senior year in high school. And a friend and I had worked it out, so we didn't have to be in until third period, which was great because my parents were away at work. He would come over to my house, and every morning we would be drinking like vodka out of Mountain Dew bottles and smoking pot, and just for some reason we never got caught in school. And so this one time he came over and we took some acid, and it was great. I loved it. I really, really had a great experience with it. And to this day, just to be honest, and I know this isn't a popular sentiment amongst a lot of people, but I still honor that time of my life, especially the hallucinogenics. They did expand my consciousness. And I'm not here being pro or anti, because I still have friends to this day that can responsibly do these kinds of things. And who am I to say you're bad for doing that? I can't. And I learned that the very hard way. But just because I can't, it doesn't mean other people can't. I actually just did a workshop at COSM with Alex Gray. Does anyone know who Alex Gray is? Very visionary artist, very much hallucinogenic, psychedelic artist. And that was great for me to be able to sit there and do a workshop with this guy and have both sides of the coin and honor and respect one another's experiences. And I think that's awesome that we can come together and work with other people. So anyways, I take this acid. I wake up the next morning. We had a great time, so why not take more acid? So we do. We go into school, third period. And right when I sit down, there is an announcement over the loudspeaker that for the 11th and 12th graders, there is a mandatory showing of Schindler's List in the auditorium. Fuck. I was actually working at a video store at the time. I knew all too well about Schindler's List. I had not seen it, but I did see it. And that's the only time I have ever seen it. I don't know why I did not run for the hills. I was actually still tripping pretty hard. And so I went into the auditorium and I sat through that 3.5 hour film. Oh, it was a terrible experience. But anyways, so we got out, and then we had a birthday party for myself and another friend that night, and I took more acid. And this was before I became full-blown addict, but I mean, that was just like, just an example. That's how I was. I was all in right from the beginning. And so I very quickly made my way through these stages of the experimentation into the regular use, abuse. And by the age of 19, it was full-blown addiction, which I know for probably a lot of people in this room is late. But I caught up quick, and I made up for lost time. And my life was a horrible downward spiral. From 19 to 24, I was a functioning addict. I held down a job. I was in school. I was in bands, still touring around. But I mean, I was just hanging on by the skin of my teeth. It was bad. It was getting worse and worse. And one of the bands I was in, they were hard partiers too. And there was a point where I was in Connecticut, and we were banned from every club in Connecticut, big or small. If we wanted to play a show, we had to go out of state. It was crazy. That's just how it was. Like, I remember we had signed this record deal, and this guy put on this big showcase for us. Like, he invited all his friends over, come check out this band. And it was only $10,000, but at the time, this was like 98, 99. That was a lot of money for an indie band. I don't remember getting there. I remember waking up the next morning and I had a bruise in my forehead, the shape of like a microphone. And I guess like I was just smashing the microphone into my head, like we broke instruments, and I woke up to this frantic message from the guy like, what the fuck happened, blah, blah, blah. And record deal was off. And that was just like, that's the tip of the iceberg of where it went. But that was just like the downward spiral that my life was at that point. Until the age of 24, I ended up in my first detox. And that was actually a really great experience for me, besides the withdrawal aspect. Once I got through that, though, it was the first time that that in many, many years, I'd gone more than a day without putting a drug or alcohol into my system. So physically and emotionally, once I started to, again, get through the withdrawal portion, I started to, my body was grateful for that. I remember feeling good. And it was nice to not wake up starting to go through withdrawals and the anxiety of like, how am I going to get high today? And you guys know how that goes. Or many of you probably know how that goes. It's awful. So I really dedicated myself to this recovery thing. I did it. I went into a 28-day inpatient program, which was awesome because I started to learn about some of the brain science related to addiction. And I realized that I was not batshit crazy, that it was a really real thing that I was living with. And then I went into a halfway house, and I lived there for 2 months. And I got a job, and I was doing some steps and working with a sponsor, and started getting the material things back, and I got an apartment. The problem was that I was basing my semblance of health and recovery on the external. So the fact that I was getting these things back into my life, and I was a productive member of society, and I had income and a girlfriend and all that, well, I'm recovering. This is great. When I wasn't. Like I said, I had a sponsor, and I was doing some of this step work, but I wasn't going anywhere near deep enough as I needed to. I was very, very scared to touch these raw and vulnerable places within myself. Terrified to do. And to this day, it's still scary. I show up and I do it. I'm jumping ahead a little, but so it was about a year into this. And let me just say one thing too. I say the 12 steps, but I honor that there are many different paths in recovery. And so I encourage those of you that are in recovery or new and seeking it out, find what works for you. For some, it might be one certain 12-step fellowship. For others, it might be refuge recovery or integral recovery. There's many different paths, so find what works for you. I'm just want to be sure when I say 12 steps, you know that there are other options as well. 12 steps are great, though, I think. So I'm in Rome, and it's about a year into my sobriety, and I took the when in Rome saying a little too literally, and I relapsed. It was my second night there, and I drank. I was with a friend who was not sober. It was actually my birthday I drank, yeah. And so I was there for 9 days, and it's kind of sad because I don't remember a lot of it. What I do remember, it was beautiful. Rome was amazing. But I remember like being in the Sistine Chapel, for example, and looking up, at Michelangelo's artwork and just being amazed. But like I was kind of sweating because I hadn't drank yet that day. I wasn't going through withdrawals because it was too soon, but it was like I picked up right where I left off, and I was drinking heavy. And so the other thing, two things from that story. Later on, I don't know if it was that night or one of the other nights, it was about 2 a.m., and I'm on a bus, and you're allowed to drink in public in Rome. And so I'm sitting on the bus with a big Foster's can of beer. Not shitty like blackout drunk, but half in the bag. And there's this older gentleman, probably in his 80s, sitting across from me, and he's kind of mean mugging me, to be honest. Like, he was giving me the look, and I'm used to people staring at me because of my tattoos. But usually when you catch someone, they'll look away. Well, this guy, he didn't break. I kind of respected it, but it kind of pissed me off too. But so, anyways, I look away and I look back, and I think he noticed that I was like getting a little agitated. So he points down at my hand, which was just on my lap, and I have the word hope tattooed across it, which I got shortly out of treatment my first time. And he points and he's like, hope. I was like, yeah. And he goes, that's the last to die. I was like, okay. I didn't really think too much of it at the time, but I was like, that's okay. But man, those words, that sentiment has gone on to become such a beacon of light in my darkest hours, the times when I wanted to really give up. And it's like literally, I hear that man in that English, the broken English, like saying it in my ear. It's very weird, yes. He said, hope, it's the last to die. Yes, meaning until your last breath, there's always hope until there isn't anymore. And that's really been a very important thing for me in my life. And then I get back from Rome, and I'll never forget, like, the heartbreak aspect. My dad was picking me up from the airport, and he made, like, this funny little sign with my name on it, like, the limo drivers will do, or whoever. And I didn't even say a word. He saw it in my face. He knew that I had relapsed. And I remember the fucking heartbreak in his eyes. It was, God, man. Those of us in the program, we have stuff we've got to work through, a lot of pain and a lot of wreckage of the past. And these are the things that I wasn't able to look at. Because even when I stand here, and I've talked about this numerous times with sponsors and with audiences, and still I feel it inside. It still is there, and it hurts. And to think about what my parents had to see through all of these years, see their son strapped down in an emergency room numerous times. Sometimes where my hands would be swollen and purple because I was going insane, like trying to fight everyone in the room. My parents had to see that. They had to see me in psych hospitals and pick me up from jail cells. And Christ, it's rough, but I'm here today. And I'm very blessed that my parents didn't write me off like so many people in recovery. They've had that experience. So that was a cycle for several years for me. I would get clean, and I would start to do a little work, but I was never willing to really get raw and go to that place within. And again, every time I would relapse, and every relapse would get worse. And that was until about 4 years ago. And this is where I'm looking at all these long faces. Now we're going to come back up again. So it was like 4 years ago. Well, there's a little more. But it was 4 years ago. I suffered the worst of the worst relapses. And it was the worst because this was the first time I didn't have any hope. In the past, even though it was very faint, there was always kind of that seed like, okay, I know that I can come back from this. I've done it before. But this time, it was completely gone. I wanted to die. I welcomed the thought of death. I had tried to kill myself twice before, but there were more calls for help. I mean, they were serious enough where they landed me in the emergency room in a psych hospital. But this time, I wanted to die, but I was scared to do anything because I knew I was really going to kill myself if I did it this time. No question about it. So I was arrested for a DUI on a Monday afternoon at 1 in the afternoon. I was pulled over doing 106 miles an hour. I blew a .33. That's that Monday, like at 1 in the afternoon. That's the way I was living. And that's another one of those things that is hard for me, not only to admit to myself, but to say in front of people. But I say that because, again, that's the reality of where we go. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I am a completely another person when I pick up and I start using. Totally different. So I wake up in the jail cell. Not my first time of that happening, but I'm immediately looking over my body. Do I have any cuts? Do I have any bruises? Did I kill anyone? I didn't ask that until I found out I was arrested for a DUI because I didn't even remember leaving my house. So they keep me overnight and they release me the following morning on a promise to appear. It's a court date thing, and I go into detox. And I was there for 7 days again, and while there, it was just the hopelessness. I lost my job, rightfully so. I missed my brother's wedding where I was supposed to be his best man, and that was devastatingly heartbreaking because my brother was very close to me. My car was repossessed. It was just a shit show. And so I get through it, and they want to send me to a treatment center down in New Jersey. I say fine, because all I had literally at this point was a court date waiting for me. But there was a 2-day window between leaving the treatment center to getting to New Jersey. So I stay with a friend in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's just a blackout 2-day experience. I barely remember getting on the bus. I lost all my luggage in New York, so I arrived at treatment with nothing, like myself. I don't remember getting off the bus because I was just drunk and drinking the whole time. I don't know how I made it, that layover from New York to New Jersey. I don't remember it at all. Grace, I guess. Not I guess, it was grace. My next memory is waking up that morning in New Jersey, and the doors that shut were pretty heavy, so it woke me up. And this clinician's assistant throws a pair of shorts on the ground. He's like, wake up. You've got to get ready for group. You pissed yourself last night. Go put these shorts on. Let's go. Awesome. That's how I start treatment. Not only that, I go to put the shorts on, but they're a size too small. Awesome. And I'm like, it's not the full-on onset of withdrawals again, but it was like 2 days of straight drinking, so it was a horrible scene. And I go, and I barely make it through group, and then I remember they take us to a meeting, and it's an AC basement, but I'm sweating. It was just awful. So the first couple of weeks go by of treatment. I'm very miserable, completely hopeless. And one of the clinical directors sees a medicine Buddha tattoo I have on my leg that I got after this ceremony. And he's a practicing Buddhist, so he invites me in his office, and we start talking about Buddhism and spirituality. And he asked me if I've ever heard of this author named Jarvis J. Masters, which I had, though I'd never read any of his material. And I knew of him because there's a Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron who will often write about Jarvis or talk about him in her talks. Jarvis is an inmate on San Quentin's death row. and he's an innocent man to the point of it's beyond the scope of what we have time for, but they reopened his case in 2011 because the evidence is so overwhelming of his innocence, and that's the first time in California court history that that's ever happened. So anyways, in November, he finally just got the date for the oral arguments, and my fingers are crossed that this man will see justice and freedom. But so I read this book that he wrote called Finding Freedom, and it is his story of going to prison, finding Buddhism, and Buddhism ultimately giving him his life back in this horrible place, San Quentin's death row. He writes very raw and real, which connected with me and has inspired a lot of my own writing. But he writes about these terrible stories, also these beautiful stories, the ups and downs. And so I'm reading about this. I'm like, wow, here's a guy in San Quentin's death row who's not only surviving, but thriving in a certain capacity. And that inspired me to pick myself back up and realize that, Jesus, if this guy can do it, then so can I. And I made that commitment to myself. And so I started actually participating in group and started journaling a bit more. I'd always journaled for years, but I'd stopped for a while, and I started journaling again, and I started doing the work. I mean, I'd been through it, so I knew what I needed to do, but I really knew what I needed to do in the sense of I needed to start going in and working with that wounding that I had inside, the deep wounds, and that was what I'd never done at that point. And that's what's made, for the most part, all the difference in my recovery, is leaning into that pain a bit and cultivating some softness and gentleness with myself in the process of doing that. It's very uncomfortable work. But whether you're in recovery or not, like I said earlier, we all have some of this stuff within us. Maybe you were bullied as a child. Maybe there was rape or molestation or any sort of PTSD. I mean, the myriad things that can happen to us in this human experience that leaves these wounds within us. And at least in my case, if I'm not going to work with them and heal them, then they sit there and they keep me sick in one way or another. So I started doing that. I came home from treatment with nothing. I had to move back in with my parents in my early 30s. This was very humbling, but I had nowhere else to go. I did. And I started sharing some of my journaling on websites that I was doing because I figured maybe this could help somebody, and it did. Oddly, it started really resonating with people, and I was getting messages about it, and that was really touching to me, because all I wanted to do at that point, when I returned home, it was like really the white flag was finally really honestly up. It was like, I want to live, and I don't want to just live, but I want to give back, and I want to do something. I don't care what it is I do. I'm not interested in being rich. I don't give a shit about any of that. I just want to be of service in whatever way I can. And I've made the aspiration every day since then, each morning. I'll say the word God for lack of a better word, for convenience sake. Could be being, isness, Brahman, Godhead, whatever you want to call it, Buddha mind. But I make this aspiration that this force that's greater than myself help me to lay myself aside so that the greater good can be done through me in whatever way I can show up and serve. And that is 110% what I attribute to the fact that I'm not only alive today, but that I'm able to do this kind of work. And I didn't start saying that with the intention of, make me of service, but I want to write some books and talk at conferences too. No, that wasn't the case. I didn't care what I was doing, I just wanted to help. And so I would volunteer at my time in detoxes or hospitals, things I still do to this day, and just show up and be there and talk to people. But so back to the writing thing, it was weird to see because I still have trouble calling myself a writer. I've never gone to school for writing. I didn't even finish my associates in college. Like, I have a high school diploma. That's it. It was awesome to hear Joe say he's going back to school, because I've often thought about it, and we're about the same age. So, maybe that was another seed being planted. But so this author, pretty well-known author, gets a hold of my work somehow, and she loves it. And she introduces me to her literary agent, and next thing I know, it's like a year and a half after that rehab experience, and I'm signing a deal with her to represent me, and then we're signing a book deal with a major publisher. And then my book comes out, and it's wow. But wow in the sense of, it wasn't that long ago where I was waking up wanting to die, where I had no hope, where I didn't care about anyone. I didn't even care about myself. I didn't care. I cared about getting high And that was it. And today, it couldn't be any more different than that. So the book comes out, and that's amazing because like it's just an extension of the work I feel like I'm already doing. And I start getting like beautiful letters from people all over the world, and not just in recovery, but family members, aunts, uncles, parents that have read it, or people in jail or in rehabs. And it's like, holy shit, like how lucky am I? Like I'm broke, man. I don't make money doing this, but I get to do my life's passion. Like I just barely pay the bills each month, and that's all I care about. Like it's a little tough because one of the gifts I've had in recovery is I've gotten married. I have an amazing wife and a beautiful 8-year-old stepdaughter. And that's the kind of shit that like makes having books out mean nothing to me. Like I have a beautiful family, Actually, I shouldn't say nothing because that gives me a chance to be here in this capacity, and that means the world to me. But, I have this beautiful family, and I wake up in the mornings not going through withdrawals. How great is that in and of itself, And I'm healthy enough to show up for people and to show up for myself. And I'm not saying that life is perfect, because life can still suck so immensely bad sometimes. Like there are days where I not hate life, but it's just like, man, it's not a good day today. Or I just had a really bad month. That's life sometimes. But I show up, and I work through it, and I do what I've got to do. And my second book just came out, and that's crazy to me because I can't believe I had one come out, let alone two, and now I have two out. And okay, I have to do one proud moment, because this is something I've had to learn. Friends have like really helped me with, like, you've got to take a little pride in what you do. I have a very hard time doing that. I can never pat myself on the back. I'm very bad at self-promotion and things like that. But this is cool. Jeff Bridges. You guys know who that guy is? The fucking dude himself. He wrote an endorsement for my book. And that was amazing to me. And not only that, but like 2 days ago, someone messaged me and was like, look at your Twitter account. And so I look, and he tweeted about my book. Cool, right? Like the gifts of recovery. So there's my one little, nice job. Hey, all right. But that's cool, but this is meaningful. There's a difference. Cool, meaningful. And this is the shit that like really means a lot to me.